Now that we got the front end of the boat assembled and cleaned up and everything looks pretty good, we can start on the back end. And the back end, from a gluing standpoint, makes the front end looks like child's play. This is one gloppy, unbelievable mess of stuff. It's just incredible. The surface areas are huge. You've got to put in lots of glue. You have to cover everything with wax paper so that you basically don't glue everything together, and it sort of works. There's glue all over everything, and there's clamps all over everything trying to hold this thing together. We've got our insert pieces set into this thing, and lots and lots and lots of clamps. And we've probably wiped this off 4 or 5 times, and glue still is oozing out all over the place, but things seem to be pretty straight and seem to be pretty level. The essence of this is that the hull wants to flare out as it comes around the bend. That's why we've got these ties between these big Jorgensen clamps, trying to keep everything in line, and I think we're doing reasonably well. Tomorrow we'll find out what kind of mess we really made. It's the morning after. Here's our great glue up. Let's see how in the heck we did. We seem to have pretty good looking joints all over the place. We also have quite a bit of run out. Good thing we used this wax paper. All of our joints seem pretty decent. We've got a little bit of a hole at the very end of our curve cut we'll have to fill. But most all of these look quite nice, actually. Very tight tail block back in here. And if we come back to the back end of this, we can see our laminations are very tight. We've got ooze all over the place. And we've also got a clamp here that's stuck to the redwood. So the way that we usually address something like this, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We loosen up the clamp just a little bit. Enough so it's still snug. Redwood's terrible for tear out, so we're just going to give it a little crack sideways. And knock on wood, we're not going to have a huge quantity of damage. And unfortunately, we've got a pretty good quantity. Well, unfortunately, we had a pretty good bunch of grain tear out when we did that. So I'm going to use a little trick here that a friend of mine, the Bill's Guitar, showed me. You get some crazy glue. This works usually pretty well, and you saturate both sides of this thing, and you tape it in place first so that you're located, and then you push it back in and tape it on. And in a few minutes you'll know whether or not you've got a savable repair that you can sand. Here's one we did a little bit earlier, and can make a viable deal. In this case, well, I don't think we're going to find out right away. Well, maybe. Basically, there's one right there that's considerably less damaged than it was. Not perfect, but better. Here's the results of our glue job after we remove our clamps. As you can see, we've got excess glue, but our joints all look really good. We've had little tear out problems here and there. Here you can see our repair where we use the crazy glue to stick the pieces back in. When we sand it, it will be almost unnoticeable. We want to lift this thing off. As long as we don't snap it off from this wax paper, it won't tear grain off. What we want to do is we want to carefully scrape and sand our excess glue off so that we don't damage the wood in our body. It means we need to lift this up, but it's still pretty green and we don't want to flex it. So what we're going to do is we're going to unscrew this mold, which is carrying most of the tension. It's the widest mold in the body. And we're going to let that come right up with the body. We're not going to take it out of the body yet. We're going to use it to hold the dimension into the body. The rest of this looks pretty good. These rear molds will slide right off, and this should help us to maintain this shape until we put our floor in. This is a great way to get off small amounts of residue. You can scrape on something with a razor blade like this and take off the chunks without cutting into the wood underneath it. And it leaves actually a very fine finish, something probably about like 400 pages. But the beauty of it is it's not cutting into the wood per se. You can see some marks on here that are relatively faint, and that's how we roughed out the original removal of our excess glue with this particular item right here. This is a Makita grinder with a flap wheel, and you have to operate it kind of like that so that the RPM stays very low when you're doing it. We've got our hull out of the mold on the strong back and have tipped it sideways, but as you can see, we have left in our center support because this epoxy is still very green, and we don't want to put a ton of load on it. We're actually a little worried about not having a clamp in it here. This is totally a glue joint, but basically our glue is pretty good. It's got a little tacky level on the surface, not tacky, more like rubbery, but you can tell it's pretty well set all the way through. And we've got a pretty nice joint here in the stern, so I think this is going to work out pretty well. And we'll flip her back into the jig and get set for the next part of our operation.